There are moments in life that just stop you in your tracks, moments that feel like they belong in a movie, except somehow they're real, and you're standing right in the middle of them, heart racing and every sense on edge. This story starts on a rainy afternoon in a little town called Cedar Falls, tucked away in northern Idaho, a place most people drive through and never give a second thought to. It was one of those spring storms where the sky darkens in a blink, the kind where you can almost hear the air charge with electricity, and the creek that normally giggles behind the houses turns into a roaring snake of mud and debris. Everyone was used to a little rain, but this was different. This was the kind of storm that whispers, "Pay attention. Something is about to happen." Now, I want to tell you about Max. Max isn't some gigantic hero dog that jumps off cliffs or fights bears. He's a West Highland Terrier, small even for his breed, white fur that somehow always manages to get dirty within 5 minutes of a walk, and ears that stick up like little radar dishes. Most people call him Scrappy, which I guess is accurate, but if you'd asked me that day, I'd have said brave, stubborn, and maybe a little crazy. Max belonged to the Miller family, Emily and Jake Miller, who lived on the edge of town, right where the creek curves around the old willow trees. Max had been with the family since he was a pup, and anyone who knows Westies knows they've got personality, the kind that makes you laugh when you're tired and makes you worry when they decide the neighbor's trash can is a worthy opponent. That day, Emily's youngest, little Tommy, just 3 years old, was playing near the creek. I remember thinking, and probably saying out loud, "Tommy should stay inside. It's coming down hard." But of course, he didn't listen. Kids don't. And if you've ever had a toddler, you know they move at their own speed, entirely oblivious to danger. Max was right there, tail wagging, running circles around Tommy as if he were his little bodyguard, barking happily at the rain. Everything seemed fine, almost peaceful, but then the creek swelled, faster than anyone expected. A flash flood, one of those sudden surges that sweeps away everything in its path. And just like that, a wave of muddy water pushed Tommy off his little feet. 1 second he was laughing, the next he was screaming, being pulled toward the rushing current, and all anyone could do was watch, frozen, hard in throat. Emily screamed. Jake sprinted toward the water, arms flailing, but the current was too strong, dragging Tommy down the bank, just out of reach. And then, this is where it gets unbelievable. Max didn't hesitate. Not a second. Not a bark of fear, not a whimper. He bolted straight for the edge of the creek, his tiny legs pumping like pistons. I swear, in that moment, everything else seemed to blur. The rain, the screaming, the rushing water, and all you could see was Max, white fur against brown floodwater, determination etched on his little face. Now, most people would say, it's just a dog. There's no way he can do anything against that current. But Max had this look, like he knew exactly what had to be done. He darted to a narrow storm drain along the bank, a dark tunnel that normally carried water under the road. Nobody in their right mind would have thought it was safe or possible, but Max didn't think about that. He crawled inside, sliding over slick concrete, squeezing through the narrow opening, and disappeared from view. And if you'd asked Emily, she would have told you it was like watching a miracle happen in slow motion, her heart breaking and swelling all at once, because her tiny boy was out there, and somehow, this tiny dog had gone after him. People say dogs are loyal, but that day Max redefined loyalty for everyone watching. Inside that storm drain, it was dark, echoing with the roar of rushing water. You could hear Max's paws slap against the walls, the sound mixing with the distant cries of Tommy and the thunder above. Max had never been in water that deep, that fast, not like this. The fear in your stomach was intense. You could feel the pull of the current, the weight of mud and debris, but Max didn't flinch. He sniffed, listened, and kept moving. He was small, but that tiny size was an advantage in a space too narrow for a human, too dangerous for anyone else to follow. Outside, Emily and Jake were frantic, yelling his name, tears streaming, calling to neighbors for help. Someone ran to grab flashlights. Someone else tried to reach into the water. The whole scene was chaos, the kind that makes your chest ache, the kind that makes time slow down to a crawl. And all the while, Max kept moving. You could almost see him thinking, "I've got this. Hold on, buddy." It wasn't training, it wasn't instinct alone. It was love, pure and unfiltered, a connection that defied the storm. And then, in the distance, a small voice. Tommy's voice, weak but terrified. Max heard it first. The sound carried through the storm drain like a lifeline. He changed direction instantly, pawing through the muck, dodging obstacles, pushing past fear, every instinct focused on that tiny human sound. He emerged at a bend, found Tommy clinging to a branch, half submerged, shivering, eyes wide with panic. Max barked sharply, and it was almost like Tommy understood that help had arrived. He grabbed Max's collar, wrapping little arms around him, and held on for dear life. At that point, Jake and a couple of neighbors, having followed the tunnel as best they could and secured ropes, waded into the water to pull both of them out. When Max and Tommy finally emerged, dripping, muddy, but alive, the relief was overwhelming. People cheered, some laughed nervously, others sobbed quietly. Emily hugged Tommy, shook him gently, and then looked down at Max, dripping water everywhere, matted, eyes shining. "You saved him," she whispered over and over. Max wagged his tail, exhausted, muddy, proud, and then promptly shook himself off, because even in moments like that, he was still a dog, and some things never change. That's where I want to pause, because this is the part that sticks with you. The part where you realize that heroism doesn't always come in the form of capes or medals. Sometimes it comes on four small legs, with floppy ears and a nose that never quits. And in that moment, standing there in the rain, watching Max and Tommy safe, you start to understand why people fall in love with dogs the way they do, why they're family, why they're more than pets, their courage you can hold in your arms. The moment Max disappeared into that storm drain, I swear time stretched out like taffy. Everyone standing on the muddy bank felt it, the kind of suspended panic that makes your stomach twist and your fingers numb from tension. Emily's voice cracked as she called Tommy's name, but it was barely a whisper against the roar of the flood. The neighbors had gathered, umbrellas slanted against the sideways rain, eyes wide and frozen in disbelief. And then there was Jake, leaning over the railing of the road, muscles taut, ready to jump in, knowing he couldn't. The current was a monster, a dark, living thing that would have swallowed any adult without hesitation. But Max, tiny as he was, somehow thought he could beat it. And for some reason, crazy, miraculous reason, we all knew he just might. Inside the drain, the world was a mixture of darkness, rushing water, and echoes that bounced off the walls like taunts. Max could feel the vibrations under his paws, the water pushing at him like an invisible hand trying to shove him back. He stumbled once, slick paws slipping on the concrete, and for a second his whole body shivered, not from the cold, but from the realization that he was really in over his head. But then, he shook it off, nose low to the ground, ears pricked, tail stiff. The sound of Tommy's faint cries was faint, but unmistakable, like a lighthouse cutting through the storm. Max followed it, winding through the narrow curves, dodging debris, inching along ledges too small for a grown man to follow. Now, picture this, a 3-foot storm drain tunnel, slick with water, filled with floating sticks and trash, and here's this tiny dog charging through it like it's his personal mission from the universe. He had to leap over a puddle deep enough to swallow him whole, squeeze past a partially blocked grate, and all the while, water was rising. It wasn't a straight line. Nothing about this was easy or fair. But Max had a rhythm, a determination that made it feel almost like he was dancing with the danger, one paw after the other, every slip and splash a testament to stubborn courage. Meanwhile, above ground, Emily was wringing her hands, pacing the mud like a caged animal. She kept glancing down the drain entrance, as if willing Max to appear, and every time the water surged with a loud gurgle, her stomach sank. "Come on, Max, come on," she whispered, the desperation in her voice raw and shaking. Jake grabbed her shoulder to steady her, muttering something about getting a rope ready, but she barely heard him. All that mattered was that her son was out there somewhere, and Max had gone after him. And I think that's when everyone realized Max wasn't just following instinct. He was doing something remarkable, something beyond training or nature. He was thinking and feeling and acting like a tiny, fearless guardian angel. Inside the drain, Max's journey took a turn that nobody above could see. The tunnel curved sharply, water now chest-high for a dog his size, and something shifted, like a log had moved, creating a dam that blocked his path. Max froze for a heartbeat, sniffed, pawed at the obstruction. He could hear Tommy still, calling softly, crying, and for a second, I think he must have felt panic too. But then he bit down on the log, shook it with all the strength his little body could muster, and it gave way. Mud and water gushed around him, soaking him, filling his ears, clouding his eyes. But he pressed forward, snapping at the water like it owed him something. The first glimpse of Tommy nearly broke everyone watching. He was clinging to a bent branch, half submerged, little legs dangling, and the floodwaters pushing him downstream. Max barked, a sharp, commanding bark that echoed through the drain and, I swear, cut through the fear. Tommy's head lifted, eyes wide, and when Max finally reached him, the little boy wrapped his arms around the dog's neck like they were tied together by fate itself. Max steadied himself against the branch, pressing his small body as close as possible to Tommy's, bracing them both against the water, refusing to let go. Now, at this point, Jake and a couple of neighbors had managed to wedge themselves partway into the drain entrance with ropes. They could see shadows moving in the water, hear barking, and adrenaline took over. They shouted instructions. Hold on, Tommy. Grab the rope, buddy. But every shout seemed swallowed by the storm. Max, for all his courage, had to act fast. There was no time to hesitate, no room to think about fear. Every instinct, every ounce of loyalty, poured into keeping that tiny boy alive. He nudged Tommy's hand toward the rope dangling from above, positioning him just so, and finally, with a coordinated pull from Jake and the others, both boy and dog were lifted from the tunnel. Emerging into the daylight, or as much as you could call it daylight through the gray storm, was like breaking through into another world. Mud plastered to their clothes and fur, water dripping in sheets, teeth chattering, hearts pounding. Tommy collapsed into Emily's arms, sobbing and laughing at the same time, and Max, exhausted beyond belief, staggered onto the grass, shook himself like nothing had happened, and then flopped down. It was cinematic, the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a slow-motion clip on the evening news, but it was real. Real tears, real relief, real mud everywhere. But here's the thing. Max's heroics didn't stop at just saving Tommy. The storm had left debris everywhere. Branches, rocks, even a small piece of fencing that had broken loose and was now floating downstream. Max, after being patted, praised, and thoroughly scolded for getting soaked, didn't run off to dry himself. He kept circling the boy, barking at anything that looked dangerous, nudging debris out of the way, almost as if saying, "I'm not done yet. I'll make sure he's really safe." Emily laughed through her tears, shaking her head, saying, "Max, you're insane, I swear." But even she couldn't hide the awe in her voice. Neighbors started arriving with blankets and towels, offering words of encouragement, and the story of Max's bravery spread like wildfire. People were snapping pictures, telling the tale over phones, and the sense of community, already strong in Cedar Falls, became electric. Every adult there knew they had witnessed something rare, something extraordinary, a reminder that heroism can come in the smallest, fluffiest packages, and sometimes it's motivated purely by love. Pure love, the kind that doesn't think, it just acts. Meanwhile, Max sat beside Tommy, panting, eyes bright and shining, and you could see it in his stance, the pride, the relief, the sheer exhaustion mingled with accomplishment. He had done it. He had faced a storm, squeezed through a tunnel, battled the elements, and saved the life of a human he loved more than anything. And he did it without hesitation, without asking for praise, without a moment of doubt. That kind of bravery, it's unteachable. You can't train loyalty, you can't drill courage into someone's heart. Some creatures just have it built in, and Max was one of them. Later, when the sun finally broke through the clouds and the creek started to settle, Jake and Emily sat on the muddy bank, Tommy on Emily's lap, Max curled up beside them, soaking wet but triumphant. Emily said something that stuck with me. "You know, we always thought he was cute and clever, but today he was our hero." And Jake nodded, still catching his breath, staring at Max like he'd just discovered a new species of dog. Everyone laughed, a little nervously, because even in relief there's that absurdity, how a little white terrier could outmatch a storm. And the funny thing is, Max, true to form, didn't hold on to his glory. He didn't strut or demand accolades. He just trotted over to a puddle, sniffed it, and promptly fell in. Because even heroes have their quirks, and even in the middle of life and death moments, dogs remind us that life isn't always serious. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and sometimes it's just downright hilarious. By the end of the day, the story had already begun to spread through the town. Kids at school were retelling it with wide eyes, neighbors were nodding in awe, and Max had already earned himself a reputation that would never fade. The local vet promised to frame a photo of him. Emily's friends were sending messages, and somehow, a little dog had reminded an entire town about courage, love, and the thin line between ordinary life and extraordinary heroism. And as I watched him lying there, muddy paws stretched out, eyes half closed but still alert for any hint of danger, I realized something. Max didn't save Tommy because he was trained. He didn't do it for reward or attention. He saved him because he understood, in his own doggy way, that someone he loved was in danger, and he would do anything, absolutely anything, to make sure they were okay. And in that, I think we can all learn a little something about loyalty, about courage, and about the unexpected ways life can surprise us when we least expect it. By the time the storm finally started to ease, there was a quiet that felt almost unreal. The creek had settled back into its banks, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the town of Cedar Falls was left in a sort of stunned calm. Families stepped outside, checking on each other, shaking their heads, muttering about the storm's fury, and every conversation somehow circled back to Max, the little West Highland Terrier who had just done the unthinkable. I watched Emily tuck Tommy into a blanket, his tiny hands still gripping Max's fur as if letting go might make the magic disappear, and I realized that this day, this storm, had changed all of them forever. Tommy was still shivering, half from the cold, half from the adrenaline crash that always comes after fear like that, and he kept hugging Max, who now seemed impossibly tiny in his arms despite the enormous heart he had just shown. "You saved me," Tommy whispered, voice cracking, and Max tilted his head, panting and wagging, maybe understanding, maybe just happy to be petted. Either way, the bond between them had grown in a way that words can't capture. Emily leaned back against the muddy bank, tears streaking down her cheeks, and Jake wrapped his arm around her, both of them looking at Max like he was something out of a fairy tale. But he wasn't. He was just a dog. A small, stubborn, messy, fearless dog who had done something truly heroic. Neighbors came by, bringing towels, hot cocoa, and words of awe. One of them, old Mr. Henderson from 2 blocks down, knelt beside Max and chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, that dog's got more guts than half the men in this town." And it was true. Max didn't care about recognition or awards. He didn't pose for the photos, though plenty of pictures were taken anyway. He didn't demand treats, though Emily made sure he got a little extra that night. He simply curled up beside Tommy, exhausted but alert, and let the world catch up to him. As the day went on, the Miller family started the slow process of cleaning up. Muddy shoes, soggy clothes, a yard littered with sticks and leaves, it was a mess. And yet, nothing else really mattered. Tommy had his tiny scraped knees and a story he would one day tell with wide eyes. Max had his muddy coat and earned respect for life, and Emily and Jake had the deep, abiding knowledge that sometimes courage comes in the smallest packages. Watching them together, it struck me how the storm, which could have been a tragedy, had become a moment of pure, unforgettable connection. And Max went back to being himself, sort of. He wandered around, inspecting the damage, sniffing suspicious sticks, and occasionally giving a soft bark, as if saying, "I checked it all safe now." You could see it in the way he carried himself, tiny chest puffed out, tail wagging, a little muddy but undeniably proud. That's the thing about dogs like Max. They're heroes in the quietest, most unassuming way. They don't broadcast it, they don't need a parade, they just do what needs to be done and wait for the people they love to notice. And notice we did. In the days that followed, the story of Max spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. People came by just to shake the little dog's paw, neighbors sent over treats and toys, and the Miller family was inundated with messages of awe and gratitude. There was even talk of a small local award for bravery, though knowing Max, he would have ignored it completely, probably sniffed the certificate, then walked off to chase a bug. But the recognition wasn't really about him anyway. It was about what he represented, the kind of unconditional love and courage that can show up when you least expect it, reminding everyone what's truly important. Emily told me later that night, as she tucked Tommy into bed, that Max had slept in a little ball on the edge of the mattress, never straying far from her son. "I think he's keeping watch," she said, smiling tiredly. And it was true. Tommy would occasionally stir, and Max would shift, nudge him gently, and settle back. It was almost like he understood that being a hero doesn't stop when the danger ends. Sometimes it's a quiet, ongoing thing, a promise to stand by the people you love no matter what. Jake added, half joking, "We used to think he was just a little furball who chewed our shoes and stole our socks. Now we know he's a miracle on four legs." And that's what struck me most about the whole story. The way a small, ordinary dog could turn a terrifying moment into something unforgettable, something that left you laughing, crying, and completely in awe all at once. It wasn't just about bravery. It was about connection, love, and the unpredictable ways life shows you what really matters. And I think that's the takeaway. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they have four paws, floppy ears, and a tendency to get ridiculously muddy. Sometimes they run into storm drains without hesitation because the person they love is in danger. Sometimes they save a life without even knowing that the world is watching, and the only reward they need is a tiny human clinging to them, safe and sound. Max was one of those heroes, and for the Miller family, and everyone who witnessed it, he became a living reminder that courage, loyalty, and love can exist in the smallest, most unexpected forms. So as you sit there, listening to this, maybe think about your own Max, the person, animal, or moment that surprised you with bravery, love, or pure heart. And maybe ask yourself, what would you do if someone you loved were in danger? Would you run straight into the storm or hesitate? Could you be as fearless, as determined, as loyal as a little dog who refused to give up? I don't know the answer for most of us, but I do know this. Watching Max that day made me believe that true courage is contagious, and that sometimes it comes wrapped in fur. And if you've got a story like Max's, or even just a story about a moment of unexpected heroism, share it. Talk about it. Pass it on. Because the world could always use a little more awe, a little more love, and a little reminder that bravery doesn't have to be big. It just has to matter. Max curled up beside Tommy that night, the rain long gone, the creek quiet, and I think he finally slept. Not just for rest, but because his job was done, for now. The heroics, the danger, the storm, they were behind them. And what remained was the quiet, warm kind of heroism that lingers long after the storm passes. Loyalty, love, and a tiny heartbeat reminding us all what matters most. So, that's the story. Max, the little West Highland Terrier from Cedar Falls, who ran headfirst into a flood, crawled through a storm drain, and saved a little boy. He's small, he's scrappy, he's messy, and he's a hero. And if you ever think heroes only exist in movies, remember Max, and remember that sometimes the most extraordinary courage comes in the tiniest, furriest packages. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Emily and Jake's shoes, watching the storm sweep your child away, could you have stayed calm? What does loyalty and bravery look like to you? Share your thoughts, your stories, and let's celebrate the heroes in our lives, big or small.